Hello, my name's Arrow. I go by they, them pronouns. And I was having a thought today around my femininity and masculinity, and I kind of came to an interesting conclusion. So, before I'd noticed that there's often cases where whether or not someone is considered feminine or masculine depends on that person's gender. So, basically, like, you could have an outfit where someone was wearing a floral bow tie, okay? So if that someone was a woman wearing a floral bow tie, it's considered quite a masculine thing. Whereas if there was a guy considered like wearing a floral bow tie, it's considered more like a feminine thing. So it's not the case for everything. Obviously, like if someone's super like hyper feminine, it doesn't matter if they're a girl or a guy, they're still they're still considered feminine. Or if someone's like hyper masculine, they're still considered masculine. But in general, it's kind of like the standard is different, so it kind of changes things. So like for the super feminine thing, it'd be like if there was a guy who had long hair and wore a full face of makeup and dresses and whatever, then that guy would be considered very feminine. And if a girl did that, she'd also be considered feminine. Whereas, like, if a guy, wore a shirt with a larger collar, and maybe wore nail polish, he would be considered very feminine. Whereas a girl doing that would likely just be considered just a girl, and it wouldn't necessarily be considered a feminine thing. Like you wouldn't point at the girl and say, wow, she's very feminine. It might just be like, oh wow, it's just, because we have that standard, so we're like, you have to, I don't know, like I hope you can understand what I'm kind of getting at. And like with masculinity too, like, having short hair and wearing a button up isn't necessarily a masculine thing for a guy to do, but it would be considered masculine for a girl to do it. And so looking at that in reference to non-binary identities is really interesting, because I think that as someone who is non-binary, like things that I do can be considered, like I as a whole being and the way that I present myself and the way that I do things, I can be considered masculine or feminine, but it's usually depending on like which gender you perceive me. So I'd be considered a very masculine girl, but I'd be considered quite effeminate for a guy, right? So, because I do things like paint my nails or talk with my hands or, stand in ways that are considered more feminine or where like have an interest in fashion, and I kind of like makeup in ways, not like a ton, but like I do. And I don't know, there's a lot of ways I'd be considered a very feminine guy. So it's interesting to kind of do that. And I think that, for me, that means that I can't really be defined by femininity or masculinity. Like, I mean, because I don't connect to a gender, right? I'm agender. I don't feel a connection. So it kind of changes things. But it's weird to think about that too, because then there's non-binary people who will present, like, if you have like a girl who presents one way and she's considered like a typical like a girl, or she's considered a feminine girl, and you have a non-binary person who looks the exact same, that non-binary person would describe themselves as feminine, right? So you could describe them even though they might not have a gender. But they also probably could say like, hey, that doesn't work because I'm non-binary. But I guess it really depends on what type of non-binary you are, because you could be in the middle. And I guess in that way, if you're in the middle, then you could be masculine or feminine. But again, it depends on which gender you're being perceived as, I guess. Or I guess the way that you want to do that. But then there's also people who are both and feel collectively both male and female. And so that would change things as well. So would they simultaneously be both masculine and feminine in everything they're doing? And then like people like me, I guess you could consider yourself masculine or feminine. But also, you know, where does androgyny fit into it? Like, could you have like femininity at one end of extreme and masculinity at the other end of extreme, and then everything else is some level of androgyny? Or is androgyny like when you're not conforming with the things associated with your gender, like if there was masculine women or feminine guys? But would they be considered androgynous women and androgynous guys? Could you call them masculine and feminine? Because again, it depends on their gender, and I don't know, it's all kind of a mess in my mind, and I'm just trying to figure out how exactly that works. Because masculinity and femininity, there's lots of different opinions, but it's ultimately somewhat objective because it's decided by society, right? And that's like the culture that you live in. So like the culture that you live in decides what's masculine and what's feminine. And I mean, there is different opinions within a culture, but it has to be strong enough to actually, you can't just have your own opinion. I mean, you can have your own opinion of what's feminine and what's masculine, but it's not really applicable to talk to other people about that unless they also share the opinion, in which case it's probably something larger. Like the idea of strength. So a lot of people consider strength masculine, and so there's people who consider being tough and hard and that masculine. But then there's also people who have that idea of chivalry and that idea of compassion and kindness as something very masculine, in that way, in that kind of chivalrous way, right? So those are two kind of contrasting opinions on masculinity that are both valid because they're believed a lot. But if you said painting one's nails is a masculine thing, in our culture, that's not really true. I mean, you can believe that, but that doesn't necessarily make it something that's as universal or something that other people will be like, yeah, I agree with that. Because it's not a widely it's not a widely agreed upon opinion. I mean, you could try to change the opinion because, social constructs and social ideas can change and develop. But, yeah, where was I going with this? But yeah, so, it's all about people's opinions of femininity and masculinity and the way that they're defined. So, how does that work? Because if people define femininity and masculinity by gender, the idea of non-binary identities really complicates that, and really makes that a whole another level of messy. And I haven't really seen anyone talking about this before. It's also interesting to look at the intersection of this conversation with the idea of the label trans masculinity and trans femininity, and looking at that those labels applying to the whole community of trans people who are assigned female at birth or trans people who are assigned male at birth. Gender is really weird and it's interesting, and I love looking at philosophy of gender and stuff. So let me know, what do you think about masculinity and femininity being defined by someone's gender? How do you think that plays in with non-binary people? If you have any ideas, doesn't matter if you're trans, cis, non-binary, a girl or guy, it doesn't matter. Anything. Anyone. Let me know what you think. And thank you for watching. Bye.